Part of the beauty of MMA is that it's an individual sport, and while a fighter usually requires a team of people to prepare for battle unless they're, I don't know, Diego Sanchez, once the cage door slams shut, this is a solo campaign. So when they win, it makes sense that they get all the glory, and obviously when they lose, however, it's a different story. They usually take it on the chin and move on. I say usually because while MMA is chock full of athletes who accept their failings, some resort to blaming everyone but themselves. I'm Tom from MMA On Point, and these are 10 fighters who refuse to take the blame. Number 10, Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey handled failure like a weak immune system handles a virus. Yep, that's what I'm going for here. But when you look into it, it's not actually all surprising. Leading into the Holly Holm fight, the bout where she suffered her first loss, Rousey boasted a perfect record with 12 relatively one-sided victories. She had defended the UFC's inaugural female title 6 times, and she was the reason why Dana White brought female fighters into the fold in the first place. And all the while, her coach claimed that she was not only the division's best grappler, but also best striker too, with some people suggesting that she could even beat up Floyd Mayweather. Who are these people? Who are these people saying this?
Sorry, Floyd, but I'm gonna have to give this one to Ronda.
Oh. Anyway, in the Mania, she evidently forgot what it was like to lose, because when Holm reminded her, she just couldn't handle it, or perhaps she just never knew how to. Years later, she admitted that her mother taught her to never entertain losing as a possibility, which answers the question about where her competitive mean streak originated. Nevertheless, her reaction was unlike most on this list. While she did have some excuses, that wasn't the issue. She simply refused to speak to the media, perhaps believing the loss would go away if she pretended like it just didn't happen. And while that's an understandable response in regular life, and while being viciously knocked out on the world stage can't feel good, it is unusual for a fighter since they are expected to face the music. However, if you think that sounds like the aftermath of another fight, well, that's because it's the way she dealt with the loss to Amanda Nunes too. At no point did she acknowledge the glaring flaws in her skill set. She just simply buried her head in the sand or pillow. Number 9, Luke Rockhold. Like I already said, suffering a brutal knockout must suck, especially in a line of work like MMA, which obligates you to publicly address it. But a fighter has a choice in what they say after the fact, and if they choose the right option, fans will generally respect him for it. Well, Luke Rockhold, he took the wrong option. He already had a complicated relationship with the public before his knockout loss to Michael Bisping at UFC 199. Many were alienated by his confident, bordering on cocky attitude, and others loved to revel in his gaffes. But it was about to get worse, way worse. He refused to give the Brit any credit at all, aside from recognizing his obvious toughness. Moreover, he couldn't acknowledge his own shortcomings, insisting that overconfidence was the only issue. For him, the new champion's win was a mere fluke. And of course, this pattern did continue. After he was knocked out by YOEL Romero, his excuse was that he just cut a ton of weight while Romero pulled his dehydration process prematurely. And while YOEL missing weight could be a factor, it was hardly the only problem. Then he took a book out of Ronda Rousey's chapter, shout out Mike Goldberg for that one, giving the media the silent treatment after Jan Blachowicz finished him and broke his jaw in his light heavyweight debut. And considering how dismissive he was of Jan in the lead up, clearly looking ahead to a lucrative John Jones showdown, it wasn't shocking that he avoided the spotlight for a while. Number 8, BJ Penn. Okay, so we all agree that BJ Penn is a legend and he's had an incredible career, recent form aside, but let's be honest, he does struggle to come to terms with his own shortcomings. He was the lightweight champion heading into his welterweight title fight versus George St. Pierre, and he looked like a goddamn world beater. And while he was undersized for 170 pounds, he demonstrated that he could overcome it by winning the welterweight title from Matt Hughes 5 years earlier. But he failed to replicate that success against GSP, losing by corner stoppage. But then Greasegate reared its slippery, slimy head. Between rounds 1 and 2, GSP's coach Phil Nurse applied Vaseline to his fighter's face, a common practice to prevent cuts. However, with excess Vaseline on his hands, he massaged St. Pierre's shoulders and back. According to Team GSP, it was a breathing exercise and the excess Vaseline made absolutely no difference, but Team PENN vehemently objected and filed a request for investigation. Ultimately, the inquiry came to nothing aside from sparking a policy change that only permitted cutmen independent of both corners to apply Vaseline to a fighter's face. Later, PENN would also accuse St. Pierre of steroid use, although his only evidence was that St. Pierre perpetually stayed in phenomenal shape. I don't think that would totally hold up in court. But nevertheless, whether you agree with PENN or not, he never stopped to really look at himself. He was a prodigy, but he wasn't always a committed athlete, and that really showed against GSP. And while Greasegate was the most well-known example of him refusing to accept blame for his failings, it wasn't the last. After succumbing to Nick Diaz, he protested that Diaz used his size advantage to win, but isn't that the point of MMA, to use your advantages? I mean, anyway, it wasn't a good look. Number 7, YOEL Romero. For someone who has never been a UFC champion, YOEL Romero can count himself lucky for the sheer number of chances he's had to try to rectify that. Leading into his title fight with Israel Adesanya, 3 of his previous 4 contests were for a belt, 1 undisputed and 2 interims. He did, however, miss weight in 2 of them, making himself ineligible to win the title if victorious, which explains why his knockout win over Luke Rockhold didn't result in his coronation. So the question is, why has he had so many opportunities despite a poor record on paper and issues making the scale at 185 pounds? Well, his fighting style is absolutely answer number 1. Boring was never a word that fans associated with the former Olympian. Petrifying, absolutely. Boring, no. I mean, he had those 10 rounds of mayhem against Robert Whittaker, a war with Paulo Costa, and that Luke Rockhold knockout in his rear view. So when matched against Adesanya, most fans expected something special. Instead, they got a 5-round dud which saw Izzy point score his way to decision. In the aftermath, the champion acknowledged that his performance was lackluster. Romero, however, blamed the proceedings entirely on his opponent, despite arguably inciting the fight's pace by standing motionless for the opening 30 seconds of it, and ultimately throwing fewer strikes than Adesanya. He called Stylebender a track star and accused him of disrespecting the sport and fans with his performance. And while Adesanya deserves some blame for the timid affair, it takes 2 to tango, of course. Number 6, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. You can draw many comparisons between Joanna Jędrzejczyk and the aforementioned Ronda Rousey, one being their first MMA losses shared various characteristics. Leading in, they were dominant champions and heavy favourites, and sure, they had experienced losses whilst fighting in their base disciplines, but those were so long ago, they were basically in another life. So when they finally fell in MMA, it was a totally new sensation, and as we outlined with Rousey, they didn't handle it too gracefully. After Jędrzejczyk was finished by Rose Namajunas at UFC 217, she had her reasons for it, but none of them related to Rose's abilities. The main issue was an alleged botched weight cut orchestrated by dietary company Perfecting Athletes, who Joanna later dropped from her camp. She also revealed how her preparation was impacted by her fiance's infidelity, which admittedly, it's pretty damn stressful regardless of profession. She was ultimately awarded an immediate rematch, but lost again, this time by decision. And now the fault lay with the inexperienced New York State Athletic Commission, as she claimed they are, quote, still learning to judge. And while it's true that the commission had only recently opened up to MMA, the judges were vastly experienced officials with duties dating as far back as 2004, 2006, and 2010. Regardless, she argued that she still should have won and labelled Rose a fake champion. Thankfully, the strawweight great appears to be handling losses better nowadays in the aftermath of the Wiley Zhong Classic. Number 5, Sean O'Malley. Yep, you saw this one coming. Sometimes you just have bad luck in fights, and to be completely fair to Sean, it's not often at all with the thousands of leg kicks that you see in just a year that just one kick totally disables a man's right leg. But you have to give credit to Marlon Vera for perfectly placing the one that he did, causing O'Malley's nerve damage. And of course the fight ended on the ground too, as a result of the mad bombs Vera landed on him there. O'Malley didn't give a post-fight interview, while his Instagram and Twitter posts did quote humbled and love y'all, so it looked like Sean would just take the L and get back on the grind for the next one down the line. The problem is when he appeared on his own podcast with his coach Tim Welch to talk about what happened, and the comments about his foot wraps began.
About 5 minutes before they said, all right, we're gonna walk. I'm like, hey Brandon, do you think you could fucking loosen up my ankle brace? It's like fucking tight. So he's sitting in the back, loosening up my ankle braces. I remember dragging my foot up against the cage, like fuck. Even still, didn't feel in danger.
And then he said that he actually wasn't humbled at all.
And that humbled post was a fucking joke. So everyone commenting stupid shit. I'm not humble.
And at no point from here did he give Vera any credit at all. Comparing their future careers, Vera's ability.
It's like, okay, let's look at his career in 5 years, let's look at mine. I'm gonna be fucking world champ and he's gonna be a fucking journeyman.
And he and his coach repeated over and over he did nothing wrong.
God, I did everything right. I did everything right. There was nothing I did wrong.
That's the thing I don't like about fighting that much. It's not like you can do everything right and not win.
It's just a shame for a bright star this early into his career to not accept what happened, as it doesn't allow him to assess what truly went wrong and how he can learn from it. But honestly, what do I know? That unshakable confidence is something that takes a lot of stars to the top. Number 4, Conor McGregor. On his ascent to superstardom, one of Conor McGregor's most endearing qualities was his mind, and while his trash talking normally took center stage, he was actually exceptionally insightful after fights, and he was always humble in both victory or defeat. For example, following his shock submission loss to Nate Diaz, McGregor solely blamed himself.
Efficiency, he was very efficient and he took shots well. I will assess it and then come back.
However, in the aftermath of his loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov, his analysis sounded much different, as he aimed the blame everywhere but on himself and gave the champion very little credit. He condemned referee Herb Dean for not standing them up rather than scrutinizing his inability to escape from the Eagles' clutches, and he also blamed an unfocused training camp which apparently concentrated too much on defense rather than offense, and then he even cited a pre-existing foot injury, which is ironic given how he tormented Rafael dos Anjos for pulling out their matchup when he had something similar. Unlike the Diaz bout, he refused to admit Khabib was the better man on the night, describing his performance as a mix of stalling, running away, and getting blessed with a lucky punch. Number 3, the Diaz brothers. Okay, so obviously I'm kind of cheating by combining 2 fighters into one entry, but considering Nick and Nate are MMA's most beloved siblings, this feels right. And while it does pay me to put them so high on this list, I actually felt like I kind of had little choice after reviewing the evidence, because for fighters who are renowned for exposing bullshitters for their bullshit, they have a poor track record when it actually comes to accepting responsibility. For example, after losing a close split decision to Conor McGregor, Nate disputed it and immediately professed that he barely trained for the rematch because he was injured. He also took issue with virtually everything surrounding the Jorge Masvidal bout. He obviously opposed the stoppage, but that's expected from, any hard-nosed fighter. But much like in the aftermath of the McGregor rematch, he cited injuries which supposedly limited his training. He then got pretty conspiratorial, claiming the doctor, quote, played me, and asserted that for some reason the promotion knowingly and perhaps intentionally booked him on short notice, so he'd be fighting under, quote, the most fucked up circumstances. And that brand of conjecture leaned hard into his brother's usual approach. Nick generally produced far more outlandish theories for his failures, and that was on full show against Georges St. Pierre. After losing a one-sided decision, the Stockton native reaffirmed his belief that GSP took steroids. Obviously, Nate would famously build on that sentiment years later, accusing, everyone of taking steroids. Nick, however, just didn't stop there. He insisted that St. Pierre had his hands incorrectly wrapped so that he could inflict more damage, and even accused the champion of poisoning his IV drip. A wild accusation indeed, but you know, that's just classic Diaz. Number 2, Tito Ortiz. Despite often being portrayed as a footnote in the UFC's history, Tito Ortiz is one of the most important fighters. His rivalries with Chuck Liddell and Ken Shamrock were among the promotion's best, particularly the latter considering it may have saved the company entirely. Ortiz and Shamrock had 3 bouts and they all broke records, but their fight at UFC 40 was truly groundbreaking. It generated an estimated 100 to 150k pay-per-view buys, sure nothing McGregor-esque, but it was at least double that of the previous Zuffa events. Many industry insiders had even suggested that it rescued the promotion from impending bankruptcy. Ortiz was a star, and whether Dana White liked it or not, he was the poster boy for the UFC for a time. However, he was also the poster boy for the subject on this list, as he had an unhealthy habit of announcing dubious injuries in defeat to avoid taking the blame. For example, after falling to Chuck Liddell at UFC 66, he gave an uncharacteristically thoughtful interview and congratulated Liddell.
Really bad, but you know what? Chuck's the best pound for pound fighter in the world right now. I got to give it to him. He's worked his ass off to get where he is, and he showed it tonight.
Yet before Rogan could wrap it up, Tito slipped into a comment about how he broke his foot in the bout.
Hit him with an inside kick, and I felt like I broke my foot, but I mean, it hurts. I mean, Liddell's an awesome fighter. Like I said, I can't say enough about him.
Then, after losing to Forrest Griffin in a rematch at UFC 106, he alleged that he fought with a concussion, a bulging spinal disc, and a cracked skull. What? And considering the potential severity of a broken cranium, you'd kinda expect the commission to surely flag it, right? Well, he was licensed and the post-fight medical showed absolutely nothing. I guess that tells us everything we really need to know. When he lost to Griffin again years later, he attributed it to a meniscus surgery and an ACL injury, but it wasn't just those wounds. He also later credited his ex-wife Jenna Jameson for his losing streak. I mean, what? And even though I researched all of the claims for this entry, I'm still not really sure which of these injuries were genuine, but regardless, I'm in awe, absolute awe of the length that he has gone to untether himself from every L that he's ever taken. And number 1, TJ Dillashaw. Despite its globalization, MMA is a tight-knit community, and with that, gym stories often circulate and eventually go public, and there's no shortage of stories about TJ Dillashaw. And it's safe to say they kind of illustrate his insane competitive streak. For example, there's that story about him allegedly striking his former teammate Chris Holdsworth with a concussive illegal knee to the head in practice, apparently frustrated after being submitted. Dillashaw obviously denied it happened, leading to Holdsworth confirming it, citing the incident as the reason that his career ended prematurely. And that's just one story of many, and they pretty much all illuminate why Dillashaw's had an excuse for every defeat in his record. He's just ultra competitive. His TKO loss and failed attempt to win tough against John Dodson was a fluke. Those close split decision losses to Rafael Assunção and Dominic Cruz were robberies, and getting dropped twice and finished by Henry Cejudo was, as TJ said, a horrible stoppage and the product of referee Kevin McDonald's inexperience. McDonald has been officiating for 15 years, by the way. Nevertheless, he makes some fair points. The Assunção fight was close, and when Big John McCarthy says he wouldn't have stopped the Cejudo fight, you gotta give it some credence. But Dillashaw has never acknowledged his role in the defeats. He even struggled to accept blame for taking EPO, which he popped for before the Cejudo fight. Not a great look after his diatribe about being robbed. He admitted his wrongdoing in the end, but he also said he didn't really regret taking the drug because without it, he probably couldn't have made the weight. Ultimately, it appeared that he was only sorry he was caught and believed he was somehow not at fault. Thanks so much to Rob Palin for writing this list. You can follow him at the Rob Palin. Also, thanks so much to the man Ben Rosette, composer of the intro music. Please go check out his music by clicking the link in the description below and catch the latest updates on his Instagram and Twitter page at Ben Rosette. Thanks for watching that video. Please do like and subscribe. We upload 3 jaw-droppingly juicy MMA videos a week to get your teeth into, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to follow us at OnPoint MMA and Tom A. Ransom on Twitter, and you make sure you have a great day.